Trump's decision to issue a pardon to an individual widely described in political circles as an accused monster triggered a storm of immediate fallout that reverberated through Washington media outlets, state attorneys' offices, and even among his closest allies. What unfolded in the hours after the announcement was not simply a routine political controversy, but a rapidly escalating crisis that exposed deep fractures within his advisory team, undermined the narrative crafted by his legal strategists, and ultimately forced the former president to confront a wave of regret he never expected when signing the pardon documents. According to sources familiar with the chaotic internal process, the decision was pushed through by a small cluster of advisors who believed the pardon would send a message of strength toward Trump's base while reminding critics of his authority to act unilaterally even when facing intense legal pressures elsewhere. But in this case, the subject of the pardon was far from an ideal candidate for redemption. The individual had been the center of a sprawling investigation that spanned multiple states and involved allegations so disturbing that even some conservative commentators refused to defend him publicly. The backlash began almost instantly. Minutes after the pardon became public, prosecutors from 2 states issued sharp statements criticizing the move, calling it irresponsible, reckless, and deeply damaging to victims still awaiting justice. The public reaction was even more explosive. Social media erupted with outrage as activists, journalists, and political commentators demanded answers about why Trump would intervene on behalf of someone facing such serious accusations. Within an hour, several high-profile members of Trump's own party distanced themselves from the decision, some stating privately that they had not been informed ahead of time, and others publicly calling for congressional oversight to examine the circumstances surrounding the pardon. What shocked Trump the most, according to 8, was the speed at which support evaporated. In previous situations, regardless of controversy, he could rely on at least a core group of loyalists to defend him. This time many stayed silent. Behind closed doors, their regret began to set in. His advisors scrambled to contain the damage, drafting talking points, exploring legal justifications, and attempting to shift the narrative toward claims of judicial overreach. But none of these narratives gained traction. Journalists quickly uncovered internal memos revealing that several staff members had warned Trump of the risks, including the likelihood that more accusations against the pardoned individual could surface. Those warnings were reportedly brushed aside in favor of political optics and the desire to strike what some inside the circle described as a defiant tone. That defiance backfired spectacularly. By mid-afternoon, Trump was described by aides as increasingly frustrated, demanding to know why the backlash had been so intense and why the team had not anticipated the level of outrage. The situation took another turn when details emerged suggesting that several victims' families had attempted to contact Trump's office prior to the pardon, hoping to prevent it. Their messages reportedly did not reach him, and this revelation triggered another round of criticism focused on the internal breakdowns of communication in his operation. Media outlets dedicated hours of live coverage to the unfolding scandal, interviewing legal analysts, psychological experts, and former Justice Department officials who overwhelmingly concluded that the pardon was one of the most controversial acts of Trump's political career. Even advisors who had publicly defended Trump on countless past controversies hesitated this time, citing the nature of the allegations and the growing public anger. For Trump, the realization that he had stepped into a political firestorm with no clear exit strategy was becoming increasingly apparent. The next 48 hours were marked by frantic attempts to rewrite the narrative. Trump's inner circle floated several explanations, including claims that the accused was unfairly targeted by a biased legal system, or that the pardon was intended to correct procedural errors in the investigation. None of these explanations satisfied critics, and several statements directly contradicted each other, creating an image of disorder and desperation. Meanwhile, state investigators announced that they were exploring whether new charges could be filed but were not covered by the federal pardon. This announcement intensified Trump's fears that the scandal could drag on for months, prolonging the negative coverage and keeping his political vulnerabilities in the spotlight. According to sources who spoke on background, Trump grew increasingly irritated at advisors who he believed had pushed him into the decision without fully outlining the consequences. By the end of the second day, even some of Trump's closest supporters on conservative media platforms began questioning the judgment behind the pardon. A few hosts who usually defended him at every turn stated bluntly that the decision had crossed a line and that the political cost could be severe, especially with undecided voters who were sensitive to issues involving violent or predatory behavior. These criticisms struck Trump, who has long relied on media loyalty as a cornerstone of his public image. Behind the scenes, he reportedly vented frustration about being blindsided by information that he felt should have been more clearly presented before he signed the pardon. Whether this frustration was directed at specific advisors remains unclear, but the tension within the team reached a breaking point as some staff members privately blamed others for failing to vet the case more thoroughly. The scandal deepened further when reporters uncovered documents suggesting that lobbyists had been advocating for the individual's release for months, including through channels connected to figures who had previously been involved in controversial pardon requests. This revelation shifted the controversy from a debate over the merits of the pardon to questions about potential undue influence, corruption, and whether the decision was shaped by financial or political pressure rather than justice. Congressional leaders seized on this angle, promising investigations and subpoenas to uncover who was lobbying whom and what conversations took place before the pardon was finalized. The prospect of hearings amplified the chaos surrounding Trump's team as legal counsel began preparing for what could become a prolonged inquiry. The internal fallout continued as several aides reportedly feared that their names might surface in communications tied to the pardon process. Some began distancing themselves publicly while others attempted to rewrite their role in internal discussions, emphasizing that they raised concerns or were uninvolved. The environment became one of finger-pointing and anxiety, and several sources described Trump as increasingly isolated, frustrated, and considering ways to shift blame onto outside advisors. At one point he even contemplated releasing a statement retracting or clarifying the pardon, but legal advisors warned that such a move would intensify the scandal rather than contain it. As political analysts weighed in, many agreed that the decision marked one of the most significant missteps of Trump's post-presidency. The combination of disturbing allegations, public outrage, and internal dysfunction created a perfect storm that eroded confidence even among segments of his base. Polling data released shortly after the scandal indicated a noticeable dip in support, particularly among suburban voters who historically react strongly to issues involving violent crime or misconduct. These numbers reportedly rattled Trump, prompting him to question whether the political damage could be reversed and whether the advisors who had urged the pardon had misled him about the potential impact. Meanwhile, the individual who received the pardon remained under intense public scrutiny as investigators in multiple states explored avenues to revive or expand their cases. Legal experts noted that a federal pardon does not protect against state-level charges, and in this situation new evidence or additional victims could potentially lead to further prosecution. That possibility further fueled public outrage as many accused Trump of enabling someone who could still pose a threat. Victims' advocacy groups held press conferences demanding accountability and urging state officials to pursue charges aggressively wherever possible. Their statements gained widespread media attention and contributed to the growing perception that Trump had made a grave and avoidable mistake. As the pressure mounted, Trump's team scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Some advisors suggested pivoting to other political issues, hoping to distract public attention, but the scandal proved too dramatic to be easily overshadowed. News networks continued running segments dissecting every aspect of the decision, from the internal dynamics of Trump's advisory circle to the psychological profile of the individual who benefited from the pardon. Even late-night hosts who often focused on lighter political satire dedicated extended monologues to the controversy, highlighting the disturbing nature of the accusations and framing the pardon as reckless and morally indefensible. The internal frustration reached a peak when Trump learned that several of his political rivals were privately using the scandal to persuade donors and influencers that he was no longer capable of making sound political judgments. This revelation reportedly angered him more than the media coverage. Feeling betrayed and increasingly concerned about the long-term political implications, Trump began expressing regret more openly in private conversations, acknowledging that the fallout was worse than anything he anticipated. Several sources claimed that he even admitted the possibility that the decision had been a serious mistake, a rare moment of introspection from someone known for doubling down even when facing heavy criticism. Despite efforts to stabilize the situation, the scandal continued to evolve as more details emerged about the individual's past, including allegations that had not been widely publicized before the pardon. These revelations reignited public fury, and journalists began questioning how thoroughly Trump's team had reviewed the case before moving forward. The growing impression was that the decision was rushed based on incomplete information and driven more by political instincts than careful analysis. Legal analysts pointed out that while presidents have brought pardoning powers, the political consequences of misusing that authority can be severe, and, in this case, the consequences were playing out in real time. Ultimately, the scandal became a defining moment, illustrating the risks of impulsive decision-making within Trump's circle. It exposed vulnerabilities in his advisory structure, highlighted deep internal divisions, and sent shockwaves through his political network. Whether the long-term consequences would fade or solidify as a permanent stain on his legacy remain uncertain. What was clear was the immediate regret, the rapid backlash, and the realization that even after years of controversy this particular decision struck a nerve in a way few others had. Trump found himself navigating not just a political uproar, but a crisis of judgment that blindsided even him and left his team struggling to contain the damage.